at a high level, what I'm intending to do is demonstrate several batch process design patterns using Azure cloud technologies. And I mention batch process because there's streaming solution, ETL solutions, and then there's traditional batch processing. This is traditional batch processing, but doing it with cloud technologies. And there's still many real world use cases for this, especially for BI and analytics, where streaming helps with analytics, but also helps with just application integration. So I was thinking, how am I going to do this? It's a daunting task. There's a lot of things to cover, and I've had a few passes at this over the last several days to try and distill it down to things that are digestible. But what I intended to do was just to take a common scenario, which is having a couple data sources and having to mash them together to form maybe a dimension in your overall data model. And I thought that AdventureWorks sample database might be a good place to start. And then I thought I'd mix in some Excel files that are hosted on SharePoint. And how do you connect to those data sources? So because of time constraints, today's demo is primarily going to be on the processing of SharePoint files. We're going to use Azure Logic Apps to connect to SharePoint to intelligently rename files and then land them in Data Lake as Excel files. And then we're going to use Azure Data Factory to read Excel worksheets, translate it into JSON, and then land those JSON files in the data lake. Data Factory will orchestrate the whole process, but we're using Data Factory, Logic Apps, Key Vault, Azure Storage, and various tools to accomplish this. After running this through with the coworker, I had this thought that, man, if this was a Power BI demo, it could be like a 10-minute demo, right? But the reality is, and what hopefully everyone can see, is that this is building a framework for a much larger data warehouse, and not just this simple example that we're doing. They're patterns that once they're in place, I'm going to show how using kind of a configuration approach, we can build on the framework that's there. So a simple example is going to be, I'm going to demonstrate this working Data Factory and Logic app for a single Excel file and a single spreadsheet and a single worksheet. Then I'm going to show how just by updating a configuration area, we can have it process additional worksheets. We're not going to get to cover fully SQL Server, although I do have some design patterns that we'll cover. I'm not going to be able to get to Databricks, and part 3 is going to be taking these ideas all the way through end to end. I have a lot of material on slides that probably will be better to view, maybe when it's on YouTube, to play, hit pause, digest what's on the slide. There's going to be a lot of material that there's just not time to go into. I want to focus more on the actual demos than a lot of the slides that you'll see. All right. So again, I mentioned this is not going to be glamorous, but I want to explain what success will look like. So success will be Azure Data Factory will orchestrate landing files in Excel from SharePoint to Data Lake, and then transforming Excel worksheets to JSON files in the Data Lake. So there's a lot of ideas that are important here and considerations when working with the data lake. So there's an assumption that you know what a data lake is, you know that what a data swamp is, and you know that to avoid that, you need to have a vision for how things are going to be laid out. So that has to do with partition strategy, how your folders are going to be organized, file naming conventions, file formats. I'm working with JSON, but there are other file formats like Parquet, CSV, that could be your choice for your data lake. That just depends on what you're doing. But in this case, we're standardizing on JSON. This is a screenshot of Data Factory, a pipeline run. starting with a parent pipeline called extract data pipeline, a sub pipeline called process SharePoint, and then two sub pipelines, one that does the copy of Excel to blob storage, another one that does Excel to JSON. What does it look like when we land the data in Data Lake? So here are some screenshots of Azure Storage Explorer. Azure Storage Explorer is a free desktop tool that allows you to connect to your data lake and basically browse it as if it was, Windows Explorer. It looks a lot like Windows Explorer, right, for navigating folder systems. When you click on a file, it actually downloads it locally and then opens it up. But you can upload files, download files, set permissions. Well, I'm going to demo that as well, what that looks like. With regard to setting permissions on Azure Data Lake, there is not this handy feature that you have in Explorer where you set the permissions and then you could force it to replicate down and replace all the permissions below. There might be a way to do that through scripting. I'm sure there is, but the tools that they give you, the GUI tools don't have that ability. And just know that permissions are inherited, and that you should do things like groups. If you don't know who's going to be accessing it at first, create an Active Directory security group and permission your containers using the group, and then the members can change later on. All right, so in this example, so what a couple things going on here, just to explain, and this has to do with partition strategies. So number one, this is in a container called raw. Number two, underneath raw, raw, by the way, in Data Lake is like, this is immutable data. We're never changing the data here. It's just as it is from the source, and we're landing it. We're not changing field names or anything like that, or manipulating the data. So I like to create my first level of subdirectories. I like to do as like source systems. So here we're doing SharePoint. Later on, we'll do AdventureWorks, and just a folder for each source system. Underneath the source system, I like to have the object itself. So this was an Excel file called state to region mapping. Obviously, I dropped the file extension, and I consider that the object name. And then normally I just have a subfolder called data, but in this case, because there was some transformation that needs to happen, I have a folder called blob, which is how it originally comes in, and then I've got another folder called data. There's another difference in here too. The Excel file obviously has many worksheets. So in the screenshot below, by the time it gets the data, we're writing out each worksheet to JSON. So we've got 2 files in there. But this is the finished product, right? Naming convention wise, so we talked about the folder partition scheme. The file naming scheme, I also have some intelligence in there too. And I saw someone speak on this, and I like this. I just like the idea of it, that if you copied a file from anywhere on your data lake and you dropped it on your desktop, it's nice to know where it came from. Why not? So there's some intelligence in the file name here. So again, it follows the folder path naming, just with underscores. So our source system, the name of the object, and then the date and time is the date and time that the data was extracted. So when you're looking at any kind of date partitioning or dates on files, that's typically the time of extraction is what's there. All right. That's what we're going to be doing. So another thing I thought was, why don't I just demo this thing working in the beginning? Because there's a lot of slides and you might get lost. And so I'm going to show you what I built from start to finish here. Switch over to here. Well, actually, first of all, I happen to have this Excel file on our DesignMind SharePoint site. I'll just open that up real quick. So it's got 2 tabs. It's got this state and region map. I got another tab for regional director. So I've got the region, and And maybe this is data that's not in AdventureWorks, but certainly states are in AdventureWorks. So that was the idea. Just put a file up on SharePoint. Now, the tool that I'm in right now is this is Azure Data Factory. And if you haven't seen it before, it is comparable in some respects to SQL Server integration services. It does orchestration. It can also do data transformation. For me, what Data Factory does really well is, and it does it at scale, is orchestration. So chaining a bunch of things together. So in this pattern that I'm going to show, today I'm just demoing the extract portion, but future demos will be the transform and the load. I'll speak a little bit about those today, but I'm not going to demo those portions yet. So things can be organized into folders in Data Factory, which is nice. So I'll have a top level folder and I'll number them so they sort correctly, but I'll have a top level folder called extract, another top level folder called number 2-transform, another folder 3-load, and maybe a fourth one sometimes for refreshing and analysis services cube. But I like to organize things that way. And then under each parent folder, I like to have a parent pipeline, with kind of the same name. So here I have a pipeline called extract data pipeline. Now, really, every source system that I'm going to have is going to be a bunch of other pipelines that could be called sequentially, or they just could be dropped on here and run simultaneously, especially if there's no dependencies. But so really all I'm doing with it for the purpose of this demo is SharePoint. So this is an activity. These are all the things you can do in Data Factory, and they're all called activities. One of them is execute another pipeline. So here I'm executing a pipeline called process SharePoint. Within that, I'm executing another pipeline called copy Excel to blob, which is this guy here. If we took a peek at that, this is actually just a simple component that's making a web request to a logic app, which kicks off the logic app. If we go back here, here I'm performing a lookup. I'll explain that in a sec. This is what we're going to process, the Excel files that we're going to process. I'm looking up in a SQL log that I've written to in Logic Apps, the files that we've processed. Then I have an iterator. I'm iterating through each Excel file, and what am I doing inside? I'm calling this pipeline called copy Excel to blob. Now, a key design pattern here is that pipelines are calling other pipelines, right? But also that pipelines are parameterized, right? So I can have this generic pipeline, but I can pass it, what file to process, what worksheet to process, passing in the log date. I parse that so I can come up with the directory name and stuff. Source directory I'm getting it from. But yeah, they're pipelines calling pipelines. The pipelines are parameterized. And we have a hook into calling logic apps. So I figured this was like a good example to run. So the way these things work is through triggers. Now I'm going to manually kick this off, but the reality is that I typically have a top level folder called 0-orchestrate, and same thing. That orchestration is calling the extract pipeline, parent pipeline. It's calling the transform parent pipeline, right? So I'm calling a series of parent pipelines, and then things get kicked off underneath. Under triggers, I could do new edit, and I could set up a, there's like 3 different types of, one is called tumbling windows. Another one is just a standard schedule. And then there's trigger now, which is what we're going to do. Before I kick that off, I want to show you this tool, which is Azure Storage Explorer. Here I've connected to DesignMind Storage. I'm connected to the raw container, and we see that it's empty. I can click refresh here. Also going to go to SQL Server and just show you that I've got AdventureWorks. Well, I'm connected to an Azure SQL database that has, or server rather, that has two databases. One of them is called Data Warehouse. I'm going to talk you through some of that and some of the objects that make up this design pattern. Excuse me. But there's nothing in my log here. So this is a modern day equivalent of nothing up my sleeves. All right, so I'm going to click trigger now. And this is running the process SharePoint pipeline. Over here on the left is an area called monitor. Monitor is where you view your running jobs. And there are, process SharePoint succeeded, okay. All right. Actually, let me go back. Just run that again. Process SharePoint. Trigger now. Okay. Yeah, there's ways to filter things in here. That concept of parent pipelines, you can create annotations on your pipelines, and then you could filter on the annotations. That can clear up a lot of the noise in here. But if we take a look in here, I just refreshed our Storage Explorer. We see that we've created that hierarchy that we were looking to create, where we've got the blob files. I ran it twice, so it pulled down files twice. And then if I go to data, oops, I've got this state region map file. So that's only one of the worksheets, right? So one of the steps in here that I kind of glossed over, I said I would get back to it, is this look up Excel files to process. And basically what's going on here is I have a log table that the Logic Apps is writing to. And so you'll see that here I wrote out the Excel file twice and created a JSON file once. This is configuration based. So if I took a look in here, what's actually to be processed is driven by a query. So I'll circle back to this, but this idea of having things configuration based will come back in the conversation. So, all right, so that's a demo of things working. What I didn't show was the Logic app. So this was all Data Factory, right? And hopefully this is clear. Hopefully this is clear, right? You can chain pipelines together. You can pass parameters, and you can have things configuration based. Now, there's certain things that Data Factory doesn't do, right? It has a lot of connectors, right? If we take a look at under Manage here, your connections to things are called link services. And if we were to click New, we can see that there are a lot. There are a lot of the Microsoft products. There's Cassandra, Concur, DB2, right? There are a lot of things that it can connect to. I mean, just going through this list, maybe there's like 50. There are some NoSQL ones. But why are we using Logic Apps for the Excel extraction? Logic Apps has even more data connections. And there's, how do I put this? There's a lot of overlap in all these technologies, right? Like if we were to really go deep into Data Factory, they have things called data flows. They have this new Power Query preview. All of these things might overlap with Logic Apps, but Logic Apps has been around for a while. I think it's a pretty elegant tool to use, and I'm going to demo that right now just to give you a sense of what that looks like. Now, I can tell you in putting this demo together, a recent client of mine had built a Logic app, and I was anticipating it not just breezing through this. when I went into Azure a couple days ago, looked a lot different and took a little while for me to get up to speed. I might be incorrect in saying this, but I think that Logic App, my understanding of it was previously was that it was like one-to-one with workflows. You built the Logic App if you needed a workflow. Now they've kind of, it seems like they've kind of separated things, and within a Logic App, I can now have many workflows. And they've also pulled out things like connections, which can be viewed and managed separately. So why are not showing it? Okay, there we go. Yeah. So what I'm going to show you is a workflow. And we'll just kind of skim through this, and then I'm going to get back to it. But this is, again, just to keep in this presentation. If I just go through the slide deck, you might get lost. And I'm trying to mitigate that by showing you the working stuff. So we looked at Data Factory. We saw that it's working. We saw that Logic App's working, but we haven't looked at the definition really. So what I'm going to do is click on this workflow. And one thing I'll mention is that there's a visual designer, but there's also a code window. So everything that we do in the designer is, and this is true in Data Factory too, and I should show that actually. If we go to Data Factory, it doesn't matter what. If I go to any pipeline or any area, and I go to this code window, there's the JSON, right? I can copy and paste that into a file. I didn't mention this earlier, and I don't have it set up here, but Data Factory tightly integrates with GitHub, and you should absolutely set it up that way. And you see that they're just JSON files in the background, but yeah, it's great for tracking changes and reverting if you have to. Common thing to do they don't give you a UI for reverting code, but you know that every time you publish and you're committing to Git, so you could go to GitHub, browse to the version of the file you want, and literally go to the code window, paste in the code here, and now you've reverted back to what you need. So it's a nice workflow. Now, they don't have that integration with GitHub yet with Logic Apps, which is unfortunate, but I'm sure it's coming. So, all right, so if we go to Designer, it's called a workflow, and it looks like a workflow. So some things to know about Logic Apps is everything starts with what's called a trigger. So when you start out a new workflow, this is like a blank canvas, and I happen to choose something called when an HTTP request is received. When you drag that on, you can carve out your own parameters if you wanted. But Data Factory see that this URL that it auto-generated. Data Factory, if we go over here, we have a web component, and the setting is that URL, and we're doing a post. So that's how from Data Factory we're calling this guy. Now, let me close out of this. All right, so that triggers the whole process. Then what do? Then we're using this component. Now these are all like drag and drop components. I was demoing this for someone earlier today, and they're like, "Oh, it's a no-code solution," and that's pretty much what it is. There's some expression building where you can, and you'll see that where I build, dynamic file names and folder paths, but I wouldn't call it like programming, right? It's more just kind of coming up with code to set back to manipulate strings, pretty much. All right, but here I'm connecting to the DesignMind portal. I'm choosing a library, and I'm limiting entries to just a particular folder in this case. So this is a standard SharePoint component. Then there's a component called initialize variable, and you could choose the data type. Here I'm just storing, I'm calling a built-in function called UTC now, and I'm presenting the data a certain way. Then you can do things just top to bottom, but to conserve space, there's this idea of like if I hit the plus sign, I can do a parallel branch. So that might be a tip if you've been working with this for a while and didn't know. But that just puts things side by side. There's no dependencies on either of these. They can all run at the same time. And probably performance-wise, it's a little bit better, right? Rather than things being sequential. All right. And this log date, I really could have put over here on the right too. There's no dependency there. But these are my variables, right? So I'm connecting to SharePoint. And by the way, I omitted something. When it get files, properties only, that's just getting the fact that, okay, there's a file in this path. It's got this file name. It's got this modified date name, but it doesn't have any of the file contents, right? So this is a very fast operation. I'm not pulling down all of the files in this step. Yeah, so I know I want to land this file in Data Lake, and I showed you that there's naming conventions, right, for the file and for the folder path, right? So I need variables to store that stuff. I want to store the file suffix because my intention is I want to do a test later on where I only want to process Excel files. So this just kind of stages this. You need to initialize a variable before you can use it, and in Logic Apps, that's two different steps. So here is this initialization. All right, so here I have an iterator. That's a for each iterator, and I'm iterating on the value that was returned from that SharePoint get files action, and I just drag that in there. So then I start iterating through, and here I'm setting the blob file extension variable, and I'm doing some things here. I'm using a split function. I'm taking the last item from the split and, splitting on the period. And so I'm getting everything at the end to the right of the period, right? A lot of this stuff, like, you Google a technique for it and it'll come back, but, as long as you know what you're trying to do. And so my intention was to pull out the file extension. Okay, and then I get into my conditions, right? So I don't want to process folders. So if the folder's false, and if the file extension is equal to XLS, then I want to go to my true. Let me move this. Then I go to my true area. And once I pass my test, this is where I'm actually going to get using another component called get file content using path. I'm going to pass it the parent site address, and then the file path I'm getting from that file content information. So now this actually downloads the data of what was in the Excel file, whatever it is. Here's where I set my folder path. So you see that if you remember from that earlier screenshot, I had a raw container folder called SharePoint. Name is the name of the file without the file extension. Then I wanted to put it in the blob folder. And then earlier on, I had set this variable, formatted date folder suffix, right? So this is a series of like forward slashes. So it's like /year, /month, /day. And that's how we're going to get that partitioning. Setting the file name, right? That's where we've got SharePoint name underscore the blob file suffix, and I add the extension back on, right? So we're constructing our file name. Then there's a component called create blob. So it's kind of a weird term, but that's what it is. And that is asking for a folder path. Well, great, we have that in a variable. It's asking for a file name. We have that in a variable, and it's asking for the content. Like, what am I going to write in there? And we pulled that from the built-in SharePoint component. All right, so all of these things are just chained together. I click the plus sign, and then I choose an action. By the way, just to see what that looks like, if I do add action, this is what I get. I get a list of built-in things, right? So control. If I clicked on control, I have conditions. I have for each. I have a switch statement, terminate, do something until, right? That's all cool stuff. But then, like, if I go to Azure, this list gets really big. look at all the things that you can connect to. It's much more comprehensive than what's in Data Factory link services. That's what I would say. And something else that I should say is that here I chose up top just to do when an HTTP request is received, and I mentioned that that's a they call that a trigger, and every workflow needs to have something that triggers it. Well, some of the triggers can be like event type things, right? It could be a file being created on SharePoint or on a directory. It could be lots of different event type things that trigger a workflow to happen. And you can do things like kick off emails and, just you can hook into almost anything with Logic Apps. And it's yeah, it's like, as I mentioned early on, it's kind of gone through a redesign recently, it looks like, and it's all good stuff. It just took me a little while to get caught up with it. But anyway, this is what adding an action is. So like, we're working with SharePoint. So I had, searched for SharePoint, and sure enough, there it is. Once you click SharePoint, these are all of the things that you can do to SharePoint. So get folder metadata, get lists, update file, you can write back to SharePoint, add attachments to SharePoint, right? Lots of cool stuff. So the trick is learning all of these and finding the one that you want. And that can take some time and some Googling. But in any event, we write the file. Now we have this dotted line here and a solid line here. What does that mean? So just to explain, every action has this area called run after, meaning this action is going to run after what? Well, it's going to run after create blob, and I checked off succeeded. I could check one or more things here, right? Log failure to SQL. If I check the run after here, this is saying to run after it has failed, right? So in here, I've got a hard-coded, I hard-code the success flag parameter for this insert procedure to no, and here I hard-code the success flag parameter to yes here, and I'm logging to SQL Server the files that I've extracted. The contents that get written to that log table, Data Factory then uses in a second step to process the Excel files into JSON, as we saw. So yeah, so just one other thing in here is to execute this guy. Again, this particular one is just using this URL, and I could paste that URL in a web browser. I don't get any feedback here or anything, but if I went back to here, I went to overview, give unsaved edits, that's fine. Oh, did it finish already? Yeah, it finished already. 7:41, that's the time it is now. Yeah. So it ran, it succeeded. I can click on this and drill into the details of what happened, how long things took, things like that. I can click on that to expand it. I get visibility to, in some of these, like where I'm setting a variable, like I see that the value was set to XLSX, so there's some great debugging, similar to Data Factory. But yeah, I recommend checking out the product. It's a pretty good tool for your tool belt, is what I would say. All right, so we've looked at a working system end to end, right? And like I said, it's not glamorous. We landed some data in Data Lake. We've got a folder partition scheme, and we've got a file partition scheme, and you've seen that. Yeah, you see that a lot of that those schemes are just by creating variables and setting values in variables and concatenating them together, and there's just some of the ugly stuff you have to do. All right, so I'm going to go back to the deck now and start speaking to just the overall picture. All right, so I mentioned that the following technologies will be covered. So we're not covering Databricks, but we have seen Data Factory. We did see Azure Storage. We'll see a little bit more as I go through the slides, but and we kind of saw a little bit of SQL DB. We saw logic apps. And I'm gonna talk about these app registrations and what they are and key vault. So yeah, so let's dive into the slide deck at this point. All right, so just a note on navigation. People in part 1 of this video series liked this breadcrumb trail. So this is the order that we're going to cover things. I'm going to explain what app registrations are. And I kind of, in coming up with this order, it's not perfect because some things you have to, you create Data Factory, but then you have to go back to Data Lake and set permissions on it, right? So it's not really linear, but the big stuff is linear, right? And then there's some iterative stuff to go back, but yeah, we're going to start with app registrations. So this second half of the demo is really talking about a lot of these components, like a lot of these things that you have to do to make everything work together, right? And they will become second nature, but at first it seems like a daunting list. All right, so what is an app registration? This is kind of a confusing term. It's not an application, and you're not actually taking an application and registering it. Really what it is, it's like it's a part of the Microsoft Identity Platform. You can think of it like a security principle, right? Like there's user accounts, and then people will create, like, historically would create like a user account, but they'd name it like service something, like SQL Server. And but at the end of the day, it was a user account. Well, this is separate. It's a standalone object. It's called an app registration. It's got an identity, and it's got secrets with it, like what you need to authenticate to something. And basically, like what I'm going to walk through is we're going to create one of these, and then we're going to go to Azure Storage. We're going to right-click on one of the containers, and we're going to do Manage Access Control, and we're going to add an app registration to it, as if we were adding a user, to File Explorer, right? And we're going to say, oh, it has the following permissions. And then later on, where that comes into play is, let's say that Data Factory has to connect to your data lake. Well, how is Data Factory going to connect to the data lake? Well, Data Factory or Databricks would make a connection using this app registration. So there'd be an area where you authenticate to the storage system with this app registration, client ID and tenant ID, and equivalent of a password kind of thing. So let's take a quick look at that. Also, the format is like for each of these technologies, I'm going to give kind of an overview. And then I don't want to spend too much time on these kind of slides, but what I did is I kind of like wrote down, when you create a new one in Azure, what are the things that you need to do, right? And that's what these orange things are. So you need to give it a name, right? So I think I called this one Design Mine Key Vault. We're going to create a secret for that registration, and we're going to make note of that, right? And this is important. When you create a secret, it'll be visible on screen, but you're going to need to use it in other places, right? Like, so you don't need it when you're assigning this app registration to the storage container, right? You just say, I want to put this app registration here. But you would need it in Databricks when you have to make a connection, right? So it's important to write it down. Other information that you need is always available. So like this client ID is this GUID, and then there's a directory tenant ID that's an object ID. That stuff's always visible, right? You don't have to write that stuff down. You can, because it's useful to have, but you can always navigate back to the screen and find it. Yeah, and then all right. So a demo for this. So let's see. So first of all, let me just go to portal.azure is where you go. And I don't know if this shows up for everybody or whether this is a recent use list, but you can search for app. Oops, turn off my keyboard. You can search for app registrations and get to it this way. But it's pretty simple. You click new registration. It asks you for some information. You create a secret, and then here it is. I mentioned like that certain information was visible after the fact, like client ID, you could copy to clipboard. This you can copy to clipboard. The fact that there's one secret, you know, the value is now hidden from us, right? So that's why it was important to write that down earlier, make note of it. Okay, second part of this is where do we use an app registration? So if I were to, this is in Azure Storage Explorer. I'm connected to our data lake. I'm right-clicking on a container, and I'm doing Manage Access Control Lists. And down here, now I'm pretty sure I just searched for it by name. So let's do Add and Azure Storage. Let's do search. No. Yeah, Azure Storage app registration. Yeah. So sometimes like searching by name doesn't work. And this is true for like Data Factory. I thought this one just worked by name, but I know Data Factory didn't. So this is where you might use the like the client ID of the app registration. So let's go to app registration here. Is it client ID or object ID? It might be object ID. Let's go here and let's remove that. Let's do add. Let's try putting in the client ID and searching. No. If it's not client ID, then it's, what did I do? I did object ID or, okay, maybe it is client ID. Yeah. Azure Storage. Wow, and I'm not sure what's going on there. All right, well, I deleted it and can't add it back, but yeah, it's a combination. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but like sometimes you have to search by the like the client ID, or sometimes you can do it by name. But in either case, we assign the resource access in here. And that's what to show with this. As far as you know, there's access and then default, and you can control whether it has read, write, execute access. When files are created, it inherits this permission, regardless of what subfolder it's in. All right, but that's app registrations. All right. Okay. All right. So next is Azure Storage. So this has even more questions, or like things that you need to consider, rather. I put in bold the selections that I made. So creating a name. Something to say about Azure resource names, as you may already know, is that many of them, and there's a lot of requests for them to get rid of this dependency, but many of the names are global in scope. So like, you know, if someone else in the world on Azure has named something this way, you can't use it. It's pretty limiting. So some of the names you'll see of Azure resources can get kind of cryptic. There are some naming conventions, and there's some articles published. Like I like to prefix them with like a 2 or 3 characters for indicating what they are. So like ADF for Data Factory, or DB for Databricks, or SQL for SQL, KV for Key Vault. And then I'll do like dash the company name, dash what environment it is, like dev or prod, right? Because you're going to have many environments, and it's just putting it on the suffix is just a good way to do it. So like kind of naming wise, what it is, like an acronym for what it is, the company name, and then what environment it's for is generally what I do. All right. Resource group. I don't know if we talked about this, but every Azure resource has to be assigned to a resource group. A resource group is a container for resources. Typically, I'll do a resource group for development resources, a separate resource group for production resources. An advantage of that is you can set security principles at the resource group level, and all the other resources will inherit. So if I have certain people who I want to be owners of all these resources in development, I can set that at the resource group level, and all the other objects will inherit it. Yeah, so it's a good way for security reasons to separate stuff. When you're creating the storage system, some of these things can't be changed after the fact, by the way. But this enable hierarchical namespace, I think, is one of them. And this is, if you want to work with data lake with, like Windows Explorer with folders and permissions, like you need to enable that hierarchical namespace. Redundancy, and again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just redundancy, I went with locally replicated storage. Access tier is hot. Performance, this is a demo, so I did standard, and creating containers. So all of this is done in the Azure portal, and then use Storage Explorer, which is that desktop tool for managing ACL permissions. Okay. Yeah, and we talked about this. Just one last thing is like, use a security group. If you don't know what end users are going to need access to your containers, maybe no one in the business is yet, but maybe at a later date someone is. You can handle this through security groups early on, and then in Active Directory change the members. All right, so we're not going to do that demo. We did that already. All right, so moving along, we did app registrations, we did data lake storage. Moving along to SQL. So Azure SQL. There are many choices in here. So in the architecture, this is where your relational data model will live. So the data lake is great for landing raw data. You can curate data, transform it, and in a parent folder or a container called curated, that could be organized by all your model objects, right? So like your dimensions and facts, those could be folders. So you could have a customer folder, the date folder, sales invoice folder, right? And then you've got all of your curated data in file format in there. And there's some advantages to that. You don't have to do that. But for certain tasks, that might be useful. You might decide to land stuff there. Or you could land stuff directly in Azure SQL staging tables. But in any event, these are the considerations. So the key ones are serverless versus provisioned. So serverless is your, for data warehousing, I think is the best option. Provisioned, I think, is, my understanding is it's a bit of a better option for like a running, it's something that's running all the time, like a transactional system. You've got an application that's reading and writing data constantly. Serverless is nice because, if you're doing batch processing and you're refreshing once a day or 5 times per day, you're only paying for the time that it's used. And it's just a more cost-effective model. You can scale up and get much bigger resources at very little cost. So that's why I went with serverless there. All right, and then auto pause after 1 hour is an important one, right? No reason to be paying for a server if no one's accessing it. Okay. This next thing, again, this was like an architecture diagram, and I was thinking of it from the perspective of how I do projects. This is not so much a cloud-based thing, although Visual Studio database projects work with Azure SQL Server. This is something that you could pause this slide when it's on YouTube and read it in depth. There's a lot of stuff in here, but there's 2 takeaways. If you're developing SQL Server code, use SQL database projects in Visual Studio. It makes source control very easy. It's like very tightly integrated. It makes deployments to multiple environments very easy. It's got schema compare built in, so when you do a publish, it will analyze your target server, analyze your local code in Visual Studio, and come up with a deployment script that is best, that's dependency aware. If you've got a store procedure that accesses a view, that accesses a table, it'll deploy the table change first, and then the view, and then the stored procedure automatically. You can do database variables and server variables in your SQL code. It's all strongly typed. So like, let's say you wanted to deploy on the same server dev instance of your database and a QA instance of your database. Like, you could do all of that with these published scripts. Generally, the workflow is I like to, with a blank project, I start with creating folders. So I create a scripts folder, a procedures folder, views, schemas, tables. You can create whatever folder structures you want, but that's what I do. Create the objects in folders. You create a post-deployment script. Not many people know about this, but this is like a way of seeding values in control tables. And I'm actually going to demo that. And then you have a publish file, which performs your deployment. All right, use database projects. Okay, another tip on SQL Server is this is off by default. So by default, allow Azure services to access the server is turned off, and that can be frustrating. Scenario is you go into Data Factory, you do a link service, you put in your server name, you put in your username and password, and it says it can't connect. Like, it might give you a message saying that this IP is not trusted. Well, what IP does my Data Factory have? Well, in reality, it has a different IP every day. So you don't want to assign an IP address. Just sliding this box allows resources to play nicely with each other. All right, so this architecture, what do we have, 30 minutes left? Okay, so I mentioned Data Factory was driven off of like configuration, and really all that means is like I like to have a schema called control. That's what the control dot is. And then a table called data source. This is where I'm listing information about my data sources. I'll use generic terms like resource and parameter. You know, resource for Excel is an Excel file and parameter is the worksheet. Resource for SQL Server is just the table name, and parameter is not used. But generally, you can come up with a kind of a table schema, somewhat generic table schema, and then you're the only one that needs to know how to use it, right, for your control flow. So yeah, so that's what that is, and that's for data extraction. And then there's like the data model processing, right? And you know, for data warehousing, understandably that if you were to refresh a data warehouse from an empty state, you would have to and in general, you would need to process your dimensions first, and then your fact tables, which reference dimensions, need to be processed second, right? That's a simple example. The reality is that you might have dimensions that are dependent on other dimensions, right? So you need to process those first, you know, one set of dimensions first, the second set, which references those first ones second, and then your fact tables, right? And the reality, what you end up with is this idea that you need to process groups sequentially, and then the items within the group can be asynchronous. But I do all of that through like this data object table, and it's got like two columns. It's got like the object group, right? And then it's got the object name. Then that's the object in my model, like customer or item or product or fact table name, right? So I always have that, and then I seed those with this post deployment script. So just to jump over to Visual Studio, what that looks like is every project's got can have one post deployment script. Here's just an example of what I'm doing. I'm like control data source. Here's AdventureWorks, and here's a particular table that I want to process. Here's my SharePoint stuff that I wanted to process. Once Data Factory is built, like when we processed information, let me go here real quick. If I go to this, all right, we go to the data folder. See, we have state region map. We have that worksheet. But that file has another worksheet called regional directors. I'm just going to show you quickly with this configuration-based approach how I can just add a line to my configuration. When I do a publish, it's going to do the schema compare and deploy all my objects. But if there's nothing to deploy, there's nothing to deploy. But this post-deployment script will always run. And here I'm doing a truncate table and reloading. It doesn't really matter. You could make it, you could do it a little differently, but down here, data tools operations, this is showing that it's working. And hopefully we will get a green flag. This little bit of a delay, by the way, in publishing. Again, it could be that the server is like just kind of gotten in a cold state, had to be warmed up again. But all right, so what did that do? Now if I went to my data sources folder, yeah, so now you see that I've got like 2 additional records. If I were to jump over to Data Factory and I went to process SharePoint, oop, not debug. I clicked debug. I wanted to hit. This is okay. Debug will still work. Down here, when you're running in debug mode, by the way, it doesn't automatically refresh what's going on. You got this little refresh button down here. They gotta click periodically, see if it's doing anything. So I'm expecting to see 2 copy Excel to JSONs this time. 1 copy Excel to blob, right? Because we have 1 Excel file. But now we have 2 worksheets. Yep, there it goes. So I didn't make any change to Data Factory, right? The idea is you build it once, and unless you're adding a new data source, you really shouldn't have to touch anything in Data Factory. I left out some things, by the way, that are important in Data Factory that I don't have on my slides. The things you configure link services, data sets, and pipelines. That's it. Now, link services are your connections to resources, like a SQL Server, say, right? Data sets represent the data that you'll be working with. So when you do, like if I go to new data set, there are many, they look like almost data connections, right? But they're not data connections. They more speak to the type of data that's going to be returned. And each one has slightly different things to set. So for my, when I'm reading Excel, well, where am I reading it from, right? Well, I created parameters for directory, file name, and sheet name. I use those parameters in my file path, right? And I've even got worksheet name here, right? First row as header, right? So in my pipelines, when I'm working with Excel, look what happens. So this is I'm defining like how I'm going to work with, and I've parameterized it. I've seen people like if build things in Data Factory where it's like if they need to connect to 10 different Excel files, they'll browse to and they'll select each, they'll create a data set for each Excel file. And then they'll click here on schema and they'll do import schema. And they've got these rigid definitions of the Excel file. In most cases, you don't need to do that, and that's a bad design. You're creating a lot of artifacts that you don't need, right? Just by creating parameters, you can make this thing generic. And I had someone tell me once that like, oh, I like this product better than Data Factory because Data Factory, you have to, create all your schemas. You have to create all these objects and map your schemas, and it's not true at all. So that's actually this data set thing is important. So what does it mean that I've got those parameters defined on the data set? Well, in one of my pipelines, copy Excel to JSON is where I'd use it. Yeah. So here I've got a copy activity. If I were to, I think early on I was saying what Data Factory does really well. Data Factory connects to data sources, it orchestrates processes, and it copies data really well. Copies something from source to target. The SharePoint example is one one example where it doesn't, but this copy activity is very efficient. Here I've got a source. So when I choose in this copy activity, it's asking for a source. When I chose my Data Lake Excel data set, it presented me with these things, right? Well, it says, oh, those had 3 parameters. What do you want them to be, right? So and that's where I can click in here. And this is all like expressions, dynamic expressions that you can write in here to set values. So again, just driving home the fact that everything is configuration based, and that you should parameterize everything. Let me go back to my slide. What was I going to go here? Oh, the the fact that the fact that now I changed the configuration, and yeah, now when the job ran, see these two files have the same date at the end. So now because I changed my configuration and ran that process, it pulled out both worksheets from the Excel file, right? So in short, like here, I'm just processing customer. In a data warehouse environment, you might have like 75 tables that you're pulling from a SQL Server, right? And with this approach, you're just adding them to the list here, right? And then Data Factory just runs. Okay, what else with SQL Server? Now, this is going to be in a future talk, but I'll just mention it. There's another design pattern that I do. And this has to do with there's the data model that's in SQL. I wrote the following SQL object pattern repeats for each dimension and fact table in your data model, right? So someone says, oh, I want a customer type dimension. You say, okay, no problem. What are the sources for it? Oh, all right, it's Excel, it's these two tables in SQL. Okay, well, and I'm not demoing this today, but like that's gonna be, I'm gonna update those in the configuration. I'm gonna land them in raw. I'm going to build a single Databricks notebook for that object called customer type. And then I'm going to build these things out in SQL. I'm going to have a staging table. So objects gets replaced with customer type. So stage.customer type, post.customer type, model.customer type, and then model.customer type view. And, basically like staging is like, this is just your ID fields, your numeric fields, your date fields, and a modified date. Your post procedure is moving data, intelligently from stage to model. So model is your gold data. This is doing surrogate key lookups on IDs, surrogate key lookups on dates, on other dimensions. It's doing your inserts, updates. And lately I've been doing, I call them soft deletes, where like in my model table, I'll have like an is deleted flag. And the modified date will represent the date that it was deleted. Yeah, it helps. It helps with troubleshooting. Like people say the numbers looked one way yesterday and they're way off today. What changed? You can query deleted data. But anyway, this is just a pattern, right? Okay. When within Visual Studio, if you have trouble publishing, the default for some reason when you create a project is SQL 2016, but you can choose your target platform of Azure SQL database. By the way, when you do another advantage is when you do this publish of code, it's aware of the version and it's aware of what SQL is supported in the version you're deploying to, which is a handy thing. All right. Visual Studio project. Okay. Okay. So we kind of skipped over some things in Data Factory. We briefly mentioned them. So like under Manage, there are link services, right? So I've got a connection to my data warehouse here, right? Let's click on that. What am I doing there? Well, I'd click New Azure SQL connection, right? But notice here, I have the option, I'm not going to click on this, but if I clicked on that, it would give me input boxes for my connection string. But instead what I did is I chose Azure Key Vault, and I'm pulling from I'm pulling from another link service called Azure Key Vault, which I defined earlier on. It's over here. And I'm pulling my secret name called Data Warehouse, right? And the advantage of using Key Vault is your data factory will be connected to source control. Everything is stored in JSON files, which I mentioned. And the audience who can read your source control might be much broader than people who should know passwords to all your key resources, right? So you don't want to just type in secure information. You want any secure information you want to store in Key Vault, and it's very easy. It's yet another component to know, but it's very easy. So over here, so creating a key vault like asks you a couple of questions, really basic stuff. But the key is you can do things like with certificates and keys. And the reality is I've only used secrets here. So there's two things you need to know. So when I go to the secrets section, so you see I created a secret for AdventureWorks. I created one for Data Warehouse. This is what it looks like. You do generate. We're not uploading anything, so I don't know, test SQL. Connection string. You want to give it a meaningful name, right? And then you're just pasting in text, and you will not be able to see that ever again, right? So whatever you're pasting in there, have it somewhere else. There's an activation date, and whether it's enabled, and you can have an expired date. And then and you click create. That's it. Okay. So then, like, if we go back to Data Factory, it doesn't give you a drop down of all the secret names, but if you know it, you type it in here, you do test connection, and connection successful. Well, it read the connection string properly. What was I going to say? Yeah, okay, there's one other area in Key Vault to know, and that's access policies. So who can read stuff from the Key Vault, right? What would be the point if anyone could just connect to Key Vault and just type in data warehouse and suddenly everything works, right? So you need access policy. And yeah, so you add an access policy. Now, since we're just doing secrets, like I just demoed, you can just do secret management. We don't need to set any key permissions. Of the secret permissions that are required, I'm going to uncheck everything. You really just need to be able to get and list. I think that's what I did. Now, the principal. So what I had to do was add, so like, yeah, so this is another one that doesn't come back by name. Let's try this again in here. I didn't have luck with that before for whatever reason, but so let's go to our Design Mind Data Factory, and where is it? I think it's under Properties. Yeah, Managed Identity Object ID. The key is Managed Identity. You kind of know that it's identity related. Copy to keyboard. I go back over here and I searched, and I searched using, why didn't that copy? Copy to clipboard. Hey, there it is. I don't know why that didn't work inside Storage Explorer before, but yeah, so here's where searching by name didn't work, but we could search by that key, click that, and click select, and then I could click add, and that would now grant my Data Factory read permissions to secrets in this key vault, right? So that's the closes the loop there. I mean, there's so many little quirky things in setting all this up, but you won't remember all of them. But one of them is that when you set up the key vault, like since we have to reference key vault in these other things, well, you have to add key vault first, right? If you add key vault and test it, it says connection succeeded, and then you try to add these other things, it won't recognize your key vault until you publish it. Yeah. But yeah, that's Key Vault. You see, it's pretty easy to use. There's no reason not to use it. It's just daunting because it's another Azure thing. I don't even think it costs anything, to be honest. I don't think there's even pricing for it. I think it's just something out there to use. All right. Yeah, I went through all that. Logic apps. Okay, so I actually had slides for this. I'm glad I showed you Logic App first, because by this point in the presentation, you might have fallen asleep. And then this one was pretty heavy. Again, there's new new settings that have come up. They have this either consumption based or standard based, or standard rather. I'm actually not sure the difference yet. I went with standard. Um, uh, there is a publish type of either a workflow or a container. This has to do with where it's hosted. I probably has some effect on pricing, although the pricing is pretty low generally. And then there's stateful and stateless. Probably has something to do with pricing and how you're using it. Uh, I chose stateful because I like to be able to go back, see all the history of like what did things look like when it ran, and stateless is probably more for like event-based things where things are moving quickly through your workflow and you don't need to know, it's too much to go back and view what's going on. Yeah, but stateful and stateless. And then just in general, everything starts with a trigger and then there's actions chained off of it, as we saw. This was what I wrote up first before building it. And I recommend kind of working that way. Think through what you want to build. Here's some of the examples of what these variables are. The numbers on here were like all of the different connection security type things. Yeah. Regarding security with these, by the way, kind of jumped over it, and I don't like how inconsistent this is, to be honest, in Logic Apps. But when connecting to SharePoint, it's like you need to use a user credential. Using the component I used anyway. There might be other ways to connect to SharePoint, like using a certificate or something like that. But in this demo, I was using my credentials. And this Azure Blob Storage connector also seemed to use my credentials. I noticed that there was an Azure Data Lake component, which looked like it supported like app registrations. And maybe that's a better way to go. But the reality is there's lots of choices. And then, when you get to security, it's just something to drill into a little further. But okay, this I skipped over this. This literally, like, I'm embarrassed to say, like, I might have lost an hour or more on this, and it occurred to me that the like this image of the thinking head is really pretty spot on. What this has to do with, if we go back up here, is this condition, the fact that we have a for each loop, right? Now, in Data Factory, and let me jump over there real quick because I think I have one. I know I have one. Let's go over here. Copy, where do I have the for each process? Yeah, for each. Okay, so in Data Factory, you have this ability to be in sequential mode or batch mode. And then if you hover over this, it'll say maximum number of parallel runs of inner activities. I've seen this be as many as 20 things executing within a for each loop in parallel. I got really burned with this, like really hard to figure out a couple of years ago inside a for each loop is, inside my for each loop here, let me switch that back. I had lots of activities. I had some set variable activities in here, and I was doing all kinds of stuff in there. And I was getting really weird results that made no sense. And really what it has to do with is with scope and variable scope. And unfortunately, inside a for each container in Data Factory, when you're in batch mode, variables don't stay in scope. And I found the solution is to build another pipeline and call another pipeline. Variables are protected within a pipeline. So So here I could be, turn that off, and I could be in batch mode, and I could be processing 10 files. I know that copy Excel to blob pipeline, or copy Excel to JSON pipeline, and any variables I in there with regard to file name or file path, I know they're safe, right? So I got burned a couple years ago in here not knowing that, right? What was going on. Very hard to troubleshoot. And then yesterday or a couple days ago, I got burned with with that, but this time in Logic Apps. And if I go, where did my Logic Apps go? Let me go back to Portal. This is, let's go to my Logic app, workflow. Okay, and let's go to Designer. Now, what I was experiencing, I think if you remember, I have a test in here inside my for each where I test, is this guy a folder or not? Is this an Excel file or not? And out on my SharePoint side, I had two files. Let me back up. I had this image file and I had my Excel file. So I don't know why it was always processing the image file first, but it was doing it consistently and it was returning false for both my cases. I could never get a true condition to fire here. So these tests, even though there was an Excel file, and when I stepped through it, it's saying that, yeah, it's an Excel file, couldn't get this to evaluate to true. And it had to do with this. It had to do with the fact that my for each container, I think it's under settings, yeah, needed to have currency control turned on. By default, for each iterations that run at the same time or in parallel. To change the default limit, turn on control and set the limit to run sequentially, select one as the limit. So that's what I did, and things started working. So a consideration, this is in Data Factory. Well, Data Factory is a nice solution. You just call a pipeline. I don't have an elegant solution for Logic App, to be honest. And this slows things down considerably. Let's say I was processing 100 files. Well, why do I have to wait for one file to finish before I go to the next one, right? Like, why don't I just, use that concurrent thing where I can kick off 100 at the same time? The trick would be, and I don't know the answer in Logic Apps, is how to isolate the variables and protect the variables so that, yeah, so that you don't have variables like moving around across different iterations. So anyway, that's why I had that slide. That's hopefully will save you some major headaches. All right. Data Factory. So yeah, so like this would have been really boring to open with. I'm glad we did the demos and then backed into this. But and again, you might pause this later on and look at it. But yeah, I mean, you create the Data Factory, you have link services to think about, you have data sets to think about, and then you have pipelines to think about. And again, my advice is to chain pipelines together. Don't try to do everything in one. So creating modular, reusable code with parameters is the way to go. Parameterize your data sets, right? I think I showed you that. Like, what file path? Don't hard code a path to a file. Have a parameter for the path, and then you just have to create this one data set. Yeah, in our case, I mentioned about creating the key vault first. I mentioned about this, the granting the access policy. All right. So we're almost at 8:30, and I really do need to leave in like 3 minutes. This is since on the subject of Data Factory, we've kind of already spoke about this several times, but the idea of chaining pipelines together. And I color coded this slide, so you've got extract, transform, and load. What I'm going to do for the third one is I'm going to include SQL extraction of a couple tables. In part 3, I'm going to introduce Databricks. Databricks, we're going to have notebooks that read. So it's going to read from 2 SQL Server folders, one from customer, one from customer address. It's going to read from that SharePoint data lake folder, It's going to read those 3 sources into data frames. Then we're going to join data frames using SQL as if they were SQL tables, like you would not even know that it was reading from files. And then we're going to shape the data in Databricks, and we're going to land it in SQL Server, and then we're going to post it. And the idea is that by the 3rd session, we're going to take everything from start to finish all the way through, and hopefully it'll be kind of crystal clear all the patterns and how not daunting it is to keep repeating those patterns, right? It's like, oh, you need a new fact table? Okay, well, here's where you're going to plug things in. You need a new dimension? Here's where you're going to plug things in. And yeah. It's a pattern that I've used now on 3 pretty big projects, and it's becoming kind of second nature for me. And again, like I said in the beginning, this is batch processing. Like this is most of what we do in BI and analytics, but just with a templated approach. I've got 1 minute. I put end here, just a quick preview of some other slides that I'll probably get into. These build on the topics we were talking about. So like within, I think I did actually talk about this, control groups, processing dimensions before fact tables. That's kind of what these show. This is a statement. If your data factory pipelines are built correctly, you can extend your data model using existing data sources without making changes to data factory. I tried to keep driving that home. So what does that mean in practice? Well, if you've got, like, let's say you want a new dimension, and that consists of like 5 different data sources to build that. Well, you're going to update your configuration table records for whatever new objects there are. You have a new dimension. Well, you're going to update that metadata, that object table. Like maybe it's called customer type. That's your new dimension. You're going to need there's a one-to-one relationship between Databricks notebook and your model objects. You'll need to create a Databricks notebook. And you're going to need to repeat that pattern of a stage table, a model table, a post procedure, and a view for the load part. And you build all those things, and then your data factory just runs. The exception is if you have a new data source completely. So you're no longer just SharePoint, you're no longer just AdventureWorks, you now have another data source. Not that big a deal. You would just do these 2 additional steps, which is build out a pipeline for that data source, land data in the data lake, and then update your wrapper pipeline, right? Which was called extract data pipeline. Just add another call to this now, to this pipeline. And yeah, what you end up with is like just you start to see how to like piece all these things together, and you sit in the meeting and someone has an idea for something, and then you start thinking, okay, where in the framework am I going to change? Okay, and things become pretty seamless, and you can move very quickly. But if we took a step all the way back, like where we started, and that list of technologies, yeah, each technology's got its own like little nuance, but yeah. So data factory orchestration, little bit of orchestration and copying, right? That's what we've done. The real data transformation is going to happen when I do the Databricks talk. Databricks is like a code-based approach to data transformation. I personally prefer it. I always hit a wall when I do the GUI-based transformations, and that wall is typically performance, but sometimes functionality too, right? And it's nice not to have to deviate from patterns. It's nice not to have some things that are built with GUI and some things that are built with script. Like what I've liked about Databricks is that it can do a repeatable code-based pattern. Notebooks can call other notebooks, right? So you can have notebooks that have, you can build reusability, is what I'm saying. Like you can have a notebook with lots of functions, and then your other notebooks don't have to have copy-paste code. They could just reference things you built in other notebooks. And it's just, it's a pretty elegant way to work.